And we're off. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here. My name is Edward. I'm president of the Chicago Ornithological Society, who is hosting this event here today. Welcome to Birds and Bytes, beginning birding Chicago style. We're super stoked to have Scott Judd as our guest speaker here today on this topic. And, you know, as we get into the sort of fall season here and are reinvigorating our virtual programs, we thought this was really the best place to start because, I mean, let's be real, whether you are a beginner or a veteran, who couldn't use a little bit of a brush up on all of those basic birding skills and making sure that, you know, we're all up to snuff. So just a few quick announcements first and foremost. Again, we are recording this event, so just make sure that if you do not want to be seen, turn your cameras off or mute yourself. For questions, we're going to let Scott do his thing, and then we'll have time for questions at the end of the program. So what we're going to have you guys do is that if you have questions that come up in the course of the program, put that in the chat box. And then once the program is over, I will call on you to ask your question in person live if you would like. But yeah, if you have questions as they come up, put them in the chat box, and we will get to them at the end of the program. Additionally, this is obviously the first in a series that we are bringing back Birds and Bytes that, you know, we have created as a result of COVID and people just generally being more virtual and wanting to still interact and be more distant. We have several more events coming up, including a program about nighthawks later this month, and are planning to do these on average about once a month through the rest of the fall and winter and hopefully into the spring as well. So definitely make sure that you're visiting our website and our Facebook and other social media regularly to be up to speed on upcoming events, both potentially in person and virtually. And I think that's really all I need to say. I'm not here to do all the talking here tonight. So I think I'm going to go ahead and pass that on over to Scott Judd, our presenter tonight. And without further ado, Scott, take it away. Can we get a big round of virtual applause for our speaker? Hey, there's also emojis down at the bottom if you want to use your applause emojis. Take it away, Scott.
All right. Thank you, Edward. Did it come over to me on the screen?
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So nice to see you all. Thanks for coming. What a turnout. Fun to see lots of birders I know. So they're here to keep me honest. And then hopefully lots of aspiring birders or people looking to push through to that next level. I think we got a nice diverse audience. Nice to see some folks from out of town. My friends Marty and Nancy, who I've worked with long time down in Western Florida. My brother Kevin's on here. Too many to mention, but very nice to see everybody. Thank you for coming. What I'm going to do is I'm going to burn through a slide deck that I've been developing for the last year and a half. I gave this presentation at the behest of a librarian friend at Bazazian Library in Chicago about a year and a half ago, and it went very well received, and I had a good time doing it. That led to doing it again in Evanston, developed the deck a little more then, followed that one up with a walk. We had a great fall migration walk and saw a ton of birds. With a big group, we actually had to turn people away because the group just got untenable. And then another friend invited me to speak to a class at UIC, so I cooked it up and did it then. Also fun, speaking to some young college students, looking at conservation issues and whatnot. So that was a broader than just becoming a bird watcher discussion. And word got to COS that I'd done this, and they asked me to jump on here and do it online. So couldn't be happier for that invitation. Thanks to Edward and all the good folks. COS is an amazing group. We've got, as I'll get into in the presentation, really an incredible community of birders in Chicago, a welcoming bunch, a knowledgeable bunch, people who come at it from all kinds of angles. And so what we're going to do here is for anybody who is just kind of looking to break in, you know, you're curious about birds, but you've never really taken the plunge to become a birder or to get focused and start finding those more interesting birds than you might just be seeing in your day-to-day travels around town. This deck is designed really to give you a very clear strategy, a simple kind of tactical approach. And I'm going to share my screen here and show you my slides. Everybody seeing that? My wife yelled from the other room. Not yet. Coming across yet?
No.
Oh, hang on one second. Sorry, Zoom newbie here. I'm on conference calls for work all the time, but rarely the screen sharer. All right, here we go. What's going on here? There we go. All right, now you should be cooking. Alyssa, we good? All right. All right, welcome. So one thing I'll say, I put a lot of photos in here, so there's a little bit of eye candy. I think you, on the other end, you can kind of decide if you see me or you see the slide deck. I'm just looking at the slides, which is good because I don't want to see me. See enough of myself all day. And all these photos are birds that I shot in Chicago, many of them right in our yard. And this is a Baltimore Oriole sitting on our fence here last spring. So I'll try to reference those as we go. But again, I'm gonna try to move pretty quickly through the slides, and then I really want this to just turn into some Q&A. When I've done it in person, it's been a little easier to have back and forth in person or in the midst of the deck. But I think Edward and I discussed we should probably just rip through the prezo and then chat freely after that. So think of your questions, shoot them over on the chat, and we'll get to those at the end. And without further ado, here is our agenda. This is what we're going to talk through. This is, Birding 101. This is aimed at getting you started. If you've just wanted to get to that next level or just been curious and just didn't know where to start, we're going to really dive right into that today, and it's going to be nice and simple. This is a Cape May warbler last spring, and my friends Matt and Julie's cherry tree. Tiny sidebar on those guys. They attended my first instance of this presentation. We have become fast friends, and they have become hardcore birders, and they are down at Emiquon or somewhere down central Illinois right now on their 25th anniversary birding. So that was a sweet, sweet story, and is one of the things that has led to me doing more of this type of presentation. So I had to give a shout out to those guys. We're going to talk through why are people so fascinated by birds, why is Chicago such a great place to bird, and it is truly a great place to bird. Why do birds migrate, and why do we care? That's going to be a central topic of this presentation. I'm going to hit the word migration on just about every turn we take. I'll get into a little bit of technical, simple stuff about binoculars, bird guides, and apps, and a website called eBird, all of which are going to be very useful to you as you get into it. For those of you in Chicago, I'll start to talk about where you can bird around here, but we'll keep in mind there's folks all around the country, and I think a lot of the things I say will be applicable there. So we're going to talk about public parks, backyards, beaches, etc. All those places are good spots to go birding no matter where you are, but especially here in Chicago. I'll give you some birds to focus on. A lot of new birders just know a handful of birds, and there's too many to go out and go after them all at once. So I'm going to give you a few groups of birds that you can probably find without too much trouble. That will help you get the bug and get you started seeing some things other than the old day-to-day guys. And we're going to talk a lot about them too. They're sort of essential to this whole thing. Another piece is going to be listen while you look. Birding is as much an ear sport as it is an eye sport. And the sooner you embrace that, the better you will do. I'm also going to talk about Chicago bird collision monitors. For those of you who don't know about them, I'll get into that later, but that is an amazing volunteer group that helps to protect and rescue birds that are migrating and having trouble bouncing off windows and such. And lastly, I will touch briefly on bird photography and cameras, and then we'll open it up and we'll talk about whatever you all want to talk about. Next slide here. Everything changes when you go to Zoom. All right. There we are. All right, so why do people watch birds? By the way, this bird on the left, this is an example of why people watch birds. I got a tip yesterday from a friend that a Baird sandpiper was on a local beach, and I had a quiet afternoon at work, and I ran right up there and found that bird. I've never seen this species in my life. That's called a lifer. We're going to learn some bird terminology too today. When you get a bird for the first time, that's your lifer, and the further you get into it, the harder they become to get and the more valuable they become to you. But those early ones are the ones that really get you the bug too. So figured I'd throw a lifer here on my first slide because boy, once you get a lifer like this on a Wednesday, Thursday, you wake up thinking, what am I going to see today? And for those of you keeping score at home, those are a couple of blurry sanderlings in the front. Shorebirds are migrating through Chicago right now. So I want to touch on that. Birds really are amazing creatures. They're beautiful to look at. They do incredible things. They fly long distances. They are free to roam. They can go wherever they want, and they do. Their survival instinct, their survival tactics, the ancient patterns they follow, all of this stuff is truly incredible. And all the birders I know in one way or another are drawn to that in any number of ways. For some people, it's just a visual thing that a bird can be as pretty as it can. But once you see the way they fly, the way they hunt, the way they eat, how they do their thing to survive and evolve and breed and all that, it's really just a whole new world that you can tap into that will stimulate your brain and give you great entertainment all at once. It's a fun thing to do. It really is challenging. You know, I've been birding a long time. I still have a lot of challenges. I still have birds I haven't seen. I still miss IDs. I still struggle with some calls. You know, we're all getting there in our own way, and I like that. And I think most people like that. It's not something that you just master in a couple of days or months. It's an ongoing thing. And it gets you outside, especially living in an urban environment, especially at a time like this when we're all locked down due to this COVID virus situation. Getting outside in a safe way is important, and birding is a great excuse to do that. You also get hip to other wildlife. A lot of birders quickly become experts in butterflies because most of the places you're looking for birds, there's probably going to be butterflies and dragonflies. That in some cases leads you to start leaving lights on and looking at moths, which I've been doing lately. My friend Jeff Scretany, who's a COS major figure for a long time here, he's helped me get into the moth game, and he's been coming over. I've documented over 50 species of moths in my backyard just in the last couple of months. And that is absolutely positively a tangent straight off my birding. I would have never done that if I hadn't got into birding. And it has been a great education and a great diversion. Birding also really makes an excellent lifelong endeavor. You know, I really have been birding my whole life. You would think that makes me the world's greatest birder and the world's greatest expert, and I am never going to make that claim. I'm still learning. I have a long way to go. It took me a long time to get to certain levels. I was happy being a backyard birder as a kid. And it took me a long time to kind of cross to the next threshold where I was actively birding instead of just looking at birds wherever I was. There is a difference. And I think no matter what pace you go at, it is something you can do your whole life. I know a lot of people in Chicago who have been birding their whole lives. We have birders who've been birding since the 50s and 60s around here who are incredible fountains of information, and they still get out and do it. They haven't seen everything. They're not jaded. They're not tired of it. It's not rote to them. It's always exciting. So that I think is important too. It's hard to find something you can do your whole life, any age. You know, little kids can do it, seniors can do it, everybody in between can do it. And I certainly plan to do it as long as I'm upright in some fashion here. And the one point I want to keep hammering is that different people bird in different ways. You really can find your own style, and it might take you years, like it did for me, for you to kind of jump to a certain next level or to decide to jump into another kind of birds. Man, you know, it took me years and years to even care about gulls. Now I'm sort of obsessed with gulls. Gulls are hard. They're interesting. We don't get that many of them in Chicago. You really got to focus. And in fact, several of my hardest core birder buddies are down at Park 556 right now watching a Sabine's gull out over Lake Michigan, which they weren't able to count because it was in Indiana water, but thankfully it pulled into Illinois water and they were able to add it to their list for the year. That is an example of some very serious birding. Other folks might just be happy to bird in their backyard. It's all cool. Do it however you want to do it, and feel free to change it up and evolve it as you go, or find a groove you like and stick with that. It's totally up to you. I don't like that my keys don't move these slides. Give me one sec here. All right. So quick background on me, how I got into bird watching. I grew up in Southern Connecticut. My mother and my grandfather were avid keepers of the bird feeder, which was great. We lived in wooded areas, and the suet feeders and the seed feeders were maintained most of the year, if not all year round, for my entire childhood. I was the youngest of 4 siblings. My brother Kevin is on here with us. Not sure about my sisters, but hey, Vin. And he can attest to the fact that we were a bird watching family, but I think he also would acknowledge what I came to learn later, which is that we never got past a certain point. We were very aware of what was coming to the feeder and or coming down into the yard at times, but we didn't really understand migration and the sheer volume of species that actually moved through the area we were in. So we were probably more knowledgeable than anybody in our neighborhood on the topic, but we weren't, you know, budding ornithologists by any means. It was a kind of thing where if a pileated woodpecker came to a dead snag in our backyard when we were eating, we would all get up and go watch it. It was fantastic. That was one of the spark birds for me and for our whole family, I think. We had great woodpeckers, but when that big pileated came in, everybody dropped what they were doing, even if they were eating or watching the tube or whatever it was. So I had a childhood full of birds and bird watching out in the backyard. Flickers were big. We had white-breasted nuthatch, tufted titmouse, black-capped chickadees, And I think, the occasional scarlet tanager or rose-breasted grosbeak would come in, and we would all lose our minds. I remember distinctly not getting that was a spring-fall migration thing at the time. We just thought these were little miracle showings. I now understand there was a little bit of a pattern to that. And I'm going to keep hammering that pattern today because it's a very important thing to get your head around if you want to dig into birding further. The other thing for me was that we took family road trips. We go to Pennsylvania from Connecticut every summer, 400-mile drive. I was the sick little snot in the back, half car sick and half asleep and sweating and moaning, and my siblings were all staring daggers at me. And as I got a little older, I started finding things to occupy myself, a big one of which was seeing hawks up either soaring over the highway or perched on poles or perched on lines. And I started pointing out the hawks and getting into them and starting to figure out what they were. A lot of red-tailed hawks. If we were lucky, occasional bald eagle. Yeah, back then there were not nearly as many. Every once in a while we catch an owl. And that was when I started to get the bug. And when I was in college, I got this book, Hawks in Flight. This is a seminal book about hawk migration written by Pete Dunn, David Sibley, and Clay Sutton, major guys in the raptor world. Raptor migration and the study of raptors in the States is an amazing thing. And in the, like 88, I think 89, I got this book. And, there's some, I had a line in here I wanted to read you earlier. It said something to the effect that the Merlin is to a Kestrel as a Harley Davidson is to a scooter. Lines like that. You look at these two birds, they look fundamentally the same, but in the air, behavior-wise, flight-wise, very different birds. And this book gives some beautiful drawings. I'm holding this up for anybody who's actually seeing me rather than slides. Little silhouettes to help you understand what these guys look like, because when they're migrating, you're viewing them from very far away. And they often just look like little specks, but you can define those specks, put a shape to it. So that was something I got into at home in Connecticut and in college. And then eventually, in about 1995, a few years after school, I moved to Chicago. And one of the first things I did was find my way to the early days of the Illinois Beach State Park Hawk Watch. Vic Berardi, Paul Sweet, Janice Sweet, a small crew of other folks set up and started counting raptors from a park up about an hour north of Chicago. And there's a whole network of these watches around the country. The Hawk Migration Association of North America, HAMANA, it's worth looking up. Really neat organization. They have an incredible website that lists all of the Hawk Watch sites around the country and collects their data. And in the late 90s or maybe around 2000, I honestly am not even sure what year it was, I started going to that Hawk Watch and immediately got exposed to birding at a deeper level than I ever knew existed. Not just looking at hawks, all those people knew and had read this book and knew the fine points of it, but these were people who on a slow day would be, hey, 50 cedar waxwings just flew by. There's a Lapland longspur. Oh man, there's a 13-line ground squirrel in the bushes here. Oh, look at that dragonfly. They were naturalists. They were aware of everything that moved out there. And that was exactly what I needed. I got the bug bad from that group. I immediately started socializing with some of those people, started going to that Hawk Watch more. I joined some email listservs. There was a thing called iBet, still running in some form, Illinois Birders Exchanging Thoughts. So it's an email list anybody could write to and ask a question or share a thought, or most importantly, share a cool sighting. And when I got tapped into that, I quickly came to realize that Chicago really is a birdwatcher's paradise. Honestly, when I moved here, I would not have expected that. I was very urban. I'd never lived in the middle of a big city like this. And to be candid, I was a little freaked out about what I was getting myself into, that I was going to be shutting myself off from nature after living in the woods as a kid and then living out in Oregon in the big country for 4 years before I moved here. But those fears were quickly assuaged when I realized how many birds actually come through Chicago, may breed here or not, migrate through one way or both ways. And once it all sprang off that Hawk Watch for me. And that was a big deal, big change in my life, and a thing I'm very thankful I did. Can't imagine life without it at this point. So why is Chicago birdwatcher's paradise? The big one is the Mississippi Flyway. There's 4 flyways that migratory birds take up through the states. There's an Atlantic Flyway, there's the Mississippi, there's the Central out over the Great Plains, and there's a Pacific. And different birds predictably will ride these routes north and south each year between their breeding grounds and their wintering grounds. And with us being right on Lake Michigan like we are, we get the birds that go up to the west side of the lake, and enormous numbers of them, hundreds of species and millions of birds, if not billions. Don't quote me on that. pass through the city, in addition to the ones that actually set up shop and will breed here and be here, for large chunks of the year. That is a big deal. And that was one of those things that as a kid, I didn't fully understand. I started to get migration once I started hanging out with these more hardcore birders. And boy, it was eye-opening. It was like hitting the jackpot. You just suddenly had opportunities throughout the year to see birds that aren't necessarily there all year. So that's a big one, the flyway in Lake Michigan. And also for a big city, Chicago has a lot of green space. We have, big and little. Forest preserves, you got public parks, beaches, boulevards, backyards. These are all perfectly excellent places to look for birds. Even highway light poles. You can be sitting on traffic in the Kennedy and count the red-tailed hawks sitting out there. And if you're lucky on some late fall day, you might get a red-shouldered hawk or kestrel or a peregrine falcon or something. So lots of places for birds to rest, feed, and otherwise be tended to as they make their way through the city. And then most of all, the Chicago bird watchers. Like I said, that Hawk Watch group was a big one for me. I made some immediate friends that I'm still friends with to this day, and got exposed to lots of information and opportunities to go birding and go to events and get outside the city and go to places that are famous for big shorebird migrations or raptor migrations, whatever it may be. And honestly, from there it sprang into my wife and I eventually. We travel a lot, or back when you could travel, we started birding on our trips. And we always had a friend who had been where we were going, and they started saying, go to this park, look for this bird, call this guy. Here's a guide you should hook up with, do a day with him, do a week with him. And so that is something that I think, no matter where you are, you can probably find them. There's a lot of bird watchers out there. It's a huge, huge community nationally and internationally these days. I think there's more people birding now than ever. The internet has been amazing for the sharing of info and the connecting of birders. And here in Chicago, you can use it, and down in Florida, down in Kentucky, wherever you might be from the group here on the call, you have access to a birding community. And more than likely, you've got your own version of why your place is a bird watcher's paradise. Chicago is our focus today, but I think there's great places all over the states to watch. And certainly the information's out there through these groups and through the internet for you to figure out what you've got access to in your, relative backyard. And next slide. So let's talk about migration a little bit. I already hit on it, but I'm gonna touch it again. It's very important. I think it's one of these things everybody kind of knows about. But I know myself, I just never got past a certain point of thinking about it until I started meeting more serious birders. And migration is central. If you're a birder, it's something you have to understand, and you'll want to understand. It's when the goodies come. Birds have been migrating since long before we were here, before Chicago became a big city on the lake with skyscrapers and a zillion watts of lights on all night. Birds were moving through here, and they're still moving through here. The birds that migrate some distances typically are going up north to a very specific habitat to breed, usually in a northern location with warm summers and cold winters. A lot of the birds that pass through here go all the way into Canada, northern Canada, up to the Arctic to get a specific type of tree or a specific type of bush or access to some certain nut, or there's any confluence of things that will cause birds to need a habitat in which to breed. But then the winters come and they have to get out of there. So they build their nests in the spring, they raise their young into the summer, and they migrate south in the fall to avoid the cold winters. And they have southern wintering grounds that might be in the States, might be in Mexico, might be in Central America, might be all the way in South America. A lot of the birds that pass through here fly incredible distances to get between winter and breeding grounds. And they repeat the cycle every year. It's pretty predictable. The dates shift a little bit based on various factors. Weather, climate change, all these things, and human development are affecting migration. But if you compare the number of birds that are in a place like Chicago for most of the year, we've got house sparrows and starlings and gulls, lots of birds that hang around and that breed here and are here all or most of the year. But then you just have this gigantic number of species and birds that are not residents, but that pass through. And if you know when and how to find them, you've got opportunities to see some really great birds. And the most avid birders I know, and myself included, are getting very, very attuned. Every year they get more attuned to migration cycles. When do certain birds migrate? What kind of weather are they likely to show up on? What kind of winds are we looking for? When I wake up and it's drizzly and there's a northeast wind, in mid-September like now, there's birds called parasitic jaeger, very hard bird to find around here. Bird typically seen out at sea off the coasts, but they migrate this time of year and they show up on the lakes. And I put in several hours myself this week trying to find a Jaeger. I did not pull it off, but I know a few people who did. And that's all about understanding migration and weather patterns and timing so that you pick that specific day to go out when you might see that super long shot bird, which is known to come here, but not seen by many people. And also the other reason it's important to understand migration is that, you know, we've got to do our part to provide these birds safe passage to and from their breeding grounds, especially in dense urban areas. I'll talk more about the bird collision monitors at the end here, but even us as homeowners, as renters, as people with homes with windows on them, birds bounce off windows all the time. There are things we can do to minimize that. There are things we can do to help those birds when they do it. And I will get into that in a little more detail, but it's a big piece of the migration puzzle. Very difficult for a bird to migrate that distance where, you know, they go from a city like Chicago that's just all metal and glass and tar with little pockets of green, and then suddenly they're out in monoculture. They're out in, you know, 500 miles of corn. Difficult. Both are very difficult settings for a bird to figure out, where do I rest? Where do I feed? Where do I get water in order to keep moving and make my trip? And that's another part of, you know, it's just mystifying about birds, that they pulled us off. It seems like there's so many odds stacked against them at this point. The fact that they can even make it happen year in and year out, I think is very enticing to all of us who just love a good challenge. So I just said a big mouthful. Consider that the preface. The official presentation starts right here. For those of you who want to get into being a bird watcher, this is where I'm talking straight to you about how to get into it. And this may be obvious, but my opening salvo on this, which is, you know, I've tested this advice works. Start watching birds. Be amazed how many people are kind of aware of birds. They know they're out there, but they don't focus on them at all. And if you want to start focusing on them, all you've got to do is start looking. Just start keeping an eye out. You know, I'm quite, you know, out of the corner of my eye, I'm looking out the windows here to see if anything pops up here, because we get a lot of birds at the house. And that's the thing. You just train yourself to be looking. You could be in the car. You could be in an interview with your boss looking out a window. I've seen some great birds while talking to leadership at work. And they've often said, what the hell are you looking at? And then I point out the peregrine falcon and they say, okay, next topic, and off we go. But it really is that simple. You just have to decide. I'm watching birds now. When I walk out, I'm going to see what's in the yard. I'm going to look up. If I see something move, I'm going to check it instead of ignoring it or disregarding it like I'm used to. And my wife Alyssa and I have turned this into a simple code. We always say ABB. Our friends are like, how do you see so many birds? And we say ABB, always be birding. And it's no joke. We are always birding in one way or another. If a bird shows up in our midst, we will see it. We might not necessarily identify it. We might not necessarily hear it call. We may not get a photo of it. But with every passing year, we are getting better at seeing all the birds in our midst. And all the birders I know are doing that. Everybody in their own way is getting better at seeing that little thing bustle out in the hedgerow, to quote Led Zeppelin. And it is just a switch you flip in your head. I'm birding now. Hopefully some of you after this, you know, you're going to wake up tomorrow, and this is a great time to do it. Migration's just kicking up. Birds are flying south. All kinds of birds are going to be pouring through Chicago, and it will be a great time for you to ABB. The other obvious point, but one that you'd be amazed how many people kind of need a nudge to do it, is get a bird book. There's lots of apps as well, but there's physical books. The Sibley Guide is kind of widely regarded as the best, but there are many. They get into specific little classes of birds, but the Sibley, as far as a general, is the one I think everybody regards as the most informative, the most well-presented. Bird books have evolved a lot over the years with photos versus drawings and descriptions. And so get yourself a bird book. There's also lots of apps, you know. I'm going to give you a handout. Actually, we'll email everyone a handout. I'm going to list a few bird guide apps in there. There's the Audubon has one, and there's one called iBird, and there are many others. I list a few of those. Some are free, some you have to pay a few bucks for, but they're incredible. You can have a full digital bird book in your phone. You can search any bird name and up comes photos of that bird, males, females, amateurs, adults. You can hear its calls. You can see its range maps. You can read its history. You can read why it was named what it's named. So it's between, you know, just start looking at birds and start studying your book. That's going to get you on the path. There's more to it than that, but those are the key essential steps along with this one. Get yourself some binoculars. Maybe you already have some. You may have a pair around the house. Maybe one of your parents or grandparent had one. Maybe a sibling left one behind. Maybe you got a hand-me-down, maybe you picked one up at an estate sale. These little guys are your friends. They open up a whole world, you know. You can bird with your naked eye, and I do, you know. If I don't have my bins, I'm still looking for birds, as are all the birders I know. But you got to get a set of binoculars, and you got to learn how to use them. They're pretty simple, but they're a little more complicated than you might know on the surface. The first thing is people say, oh gosh, you know, I don't want to spend a lot of money, or I don't have a lot of money to spend, and that's fine. You don't need to. These binoculars that I like to use, these are not fancy, expensive binoculars. These are about 140 bucks. For comparison's sake, you could go buy a real entry-level pair for 50 bucks that a few months into it, you might kind of wish you'd gone a little up market. On the flip side, I know people who carry $2,000 and $3,000 binoculars. Binoculars have gotten very advanced. You can buy really fancy high-end optics. If you've got money to burn and you're going to get into it, you know, go get a set of those big guns. But if you want something that's going to work for you, not break the bank, and you're not going to be crushed if you break them or lose them, something like this is good. This is a Wingspan. A lot of companies like this, making these kind of mid-level, entry-level, inexpensive jobbies. But I want to talk about the mechanics of these. The first thing that you got to get comfortable with is this distance between the eyes. If you're seeing me, hopefully I'm showing you my bins. And you'd be amazed how many people I hand my binoculars and they don't quite realize that you can move them up or down to space out how far apart the eyepieces are, because everybody's eyes are a little different. So you get them up to your eyes and you just get them comfortable where you're seeing a single circle. That's your first thing. Get your eye distance right. Hello. Somebody just stole the screen share, quite possibly not meaning to.
Oh no, I'm just doing that to highlight your video, Scott.
Oh, cool.
So
All right. Yeah,
see much better.
Yeah. So hopefully you're seeing my bends. So yeah, first thing, get your distance right. It's just this hinge here, and then you set them so that once you got them together, you want to see a single circle. The two tubes make one. The next one is your center focus knob. So you look at something, you know, pick a light on your garage or a mailbox or just any old thing when you're first messing with the binoculars, and twist this knob until they're in focus. You go one direction, things get further away. You go the other direction, they get closer. And pretty simple to focus, not always fast. You know, you're looking at a tiny bird that's fast moving. You get those pins up and get focused. That's a real skill you're going to develop, to be fast on getting on a subject and focusing, but just understanding, getting that eye distance right, getting on your focus knob. And then there's two other pieces, and these are the ones most people miss. Most people, I myself had binoculars for many years before I really understood these eye cups. Most binoculars have these cups that screw up or down. These are totally optional. If you read the manuals, most of them will say if you're a glasses wearer, you should have them down. So when you got your specs on, if you have these down, you can basically put these right up against your glasses. And if you're not a glasses wearer, most of them say put the cups up. I have come to find that is not a hard and fast rule. I actually prefer them down all the time. I think I get a bigger, cleaner view with them down, whether I have my glasses on or not. And that's just one of those personal preference things. Just mess with them and see what you like. And maybe different settings, different days, you may do different things. Don't just do one and stick with it. Actually play with them. I've been doing this for years, and I still muck with them now and then, see if I can find some recipe. But the big mystical thing on the binocular that nobody who's new at it seems to get, and most, you know, myself included, didn't read the manual for a long time, there's this little thing called the diopter ring. The right eyepiece actually turns. The left eyepiece typically doesn't. So what that means is the binocular manufacturer is assuming that your two eyes are different, and mine are. My prescription and my glasses, very different. One eye is nearsighted, one is far. So if my binoculars were calibrated left and right, exact same view, my view would always be a little out of whack. This diopter ring actually lets me refocus the right eye to accommodate its differences. So what you do is you put your bins up, you focus on something with your left eye, and then you shut that eye, and you look through the right, and you turn this little guy until it matches. You want them both in focus without you having to touch the center focus knob. And again, you know, you may not remember all this today. It is online. You can find these instructions. There's YouTube videos. There will be a manual with a pair of new binoculars if you buy them. But getting your binoculars dialed in, to get your eye distance right, decide how you like your eye cups, learn to use that center focus, and most of all, get that diopter ring dialed in for yourself. And even that I tweak day to day. When I'm birding close, if I'm looking at warblers 20 feet away, I said it one way: if I'm looking at hawks 200 yards away, I have to adjust it because my eye sees differently out there. So these just become a tool that you're going to dial in, just like you would tune up a guitar, just like you would sharpen a kitchen knife. You just have to be aware that they're kind of a living, breathing thing of their own, and they're a big part of your experience. And the last thing I'll say on binoculars is when I see new binoculars users grab them, a lot of people love to stick them right in their eye socket. They just jam them in as if they're trying to put them inside their head. This is not the way to go. If you watch the more experienced birders, instead of standing straight up and shoving the bins right in their eye sockets, they actually kind of lean forward just a little bit. You stick your head out a tiny bit and you kind of just touch these guys to your brow. So you're sort of looking out through them instead of just plugging right into them. It will open up more field of view for you in the binoculars. It also is much less fatiguing. You know, if you're out birding for hours, you want to make it as unaggressive on your head and on your hands and arms as possible. So you just develop a light touch, and you also want to be able to move fast. And that whole jamming them into the sockets thing is not a fast move. You know, you're going to be futzing to adjust them. Whereas if you just get them touched to that brow and you see something, you can get them up and go quite quickly. And you can do this for hours without wearing yourself out. From there, the big trick is, there's like this Jedi mind trick birders have, which they see a bird, naked eye, assuming their binoculars are close to focused for that distance, they can just look at the bird and put the bins up and see the bird or get close to it. I hand new birders binoculars and they're up flailing around. The bird is here and they're looking into the next county. Oh my God, I can't see. And they get very flustered. And I was there, you know, I used to take my binoculars to rock concerts in the 80s. And that's actually where I really learned to get good at the binoculars, because I was checking out what kind of effects pedal the guitar player was using from the cheap seats. Served me very well when I got into birding. But so what you want to do is practice. Just go out inside, look at the mailbox, look at cars going by, read license plates. I use my binoculars in the car when Alyssa's driving. I will literally, like, if there's no birds, I'll pass time looking at license plates and see what states people are from and see if I can read a license plate, you know, quarter mile in front of us. And you'd be amazed what you can pull in with some 7 or 8X binoculars. So that's my quick wrap on that. There is a list in the handout, an Audubon Society guide to buying binoculars, all price levels from that $50 pair up through those several $1,000 pairs. Nikon Monarch is one they mentioned in there. That's a few $100. That's like the standard if you want to throw down a little bit of cash. But something like these Wingspans and some others, great place to get started. And please consult that list and get yourself a pair if you want to get into this and you don't have access to any yet. And so I'm going to move on to my next slide. We're back in slide view. All right, I'm trusting you guys can see my slides again. All right. So here's another real simple tactical thing. Just get to know your local regulars, at least in Chicago and most places in the States. There are a handful of birds that are pretty omnipresent, and you probably know them already, whether you think about them or not. The house sparrow, it's an introduced species from Europe. There are millions of them, and they are here in Chicago all year round. They probably nest in your bushes or in your neighbor's broken gutter. But they're an interesting bird. They don't all look the same. And there are tons of them. And there can be a time when you're a new birder where you think the only bird in this entire city is the house sparrow, the pigeon, and the gull. I was there for a while. It's like you have to stare at them. And like house finches, they're not nearly as numerous as house sparrows, but there's lots of them at certain times of year, most of the year. American robins, same deal, not here really in big numbers all year, but lots of them when they're around. If you stay up late at night, you hear them when you're trying to get to sleep. They probably breed on your block. You've probably seen a baby robin in your yard flailing around, and you've wondered what that was doing there. We had enormous numbers of robins breeding on our block this spring and summer. They were everywhere. Northern cardinals, I put one on here. This bird on the left, that's a female northern cardinal, not the male. Looks a little different, same shape, but this is a theme I'll hit too. The males and females and adults and immatures don't all look the same. And so European starling, mourning dove, rock pigeon, ring-billed gulls. There's 8 birds, you know, that you can give yourself an assignment in the next week. Try to see most of those. The robins may be gone by now, but you could probably, and the cardinals haven't been around as much, but I think we have some cardinals all year. Lots of starlings. Those are the guys in the grass on the curb out in traffic, you know, 50 of them feeding on seeds in the grass. Mourning doves, they make that sitting up on the wires. No doubt you're seeing and hearing them, whether you're thinking about it. Rock pigeon is the proper name of good old pigeon, of which, any city's got millions of them. And ring-billed gulls are by far the most common and numerous gull that you'll see if you go out to the beach in Chicago, and likewise in a bunch of other places in the States too. So your task is just get to know them. Get to the point where you can just knock them off. That's a starling, that's a finch, that's a cardinal, that's a gull, that's a rock pigeon. By doing so, you're gonna be able to filter on them. You're gonna start to say, that is not one of these 8 birds. And that's really your task. You don't wanna try to memorize all 350 species of birds that you might ever be able to see in Chicago. It's just too much. It will be too daunting. It will not be fun. So start small. Start with the easy ones, get to know them, and then start looking for everything else, especially during spring and fall migration, but not only during spring and fall migration. Winter and summer are great times to bird around here as well. There's always something to see. And by familiarizing yourself with the birds that are by far the most numerous and the most obvious, they're the least daunted by people, they travel in big numbers, they're easy to spot, you'll get able to filter on them and find the birds that are not those guys. And then that's when things open up for you. You can, you'll quickly get the bug. They call it a spark bird. Everybody's got that bird, that first good bird they find. When you do that, at least if you're like me and like a lot of the bird watchers I know are on here, Carl, Amanda, Edward, you get a fever for these things. You see one, you want to see another one, then you want to see a different species, and then you want to see them when they're breeding, and it just spirals, and it's great fun. And it all starts with filtering on those simple, easy birds, getting hip to migration, thinking about spring and fall, knowing that's what, April and May, September, October, when the most birds are moving, but it's not the only time. But if you're only going to bird a few months a year, spring and fall are the time to do it. I would encourage you to go all year round, but I can tell you, I myself spend a lot more time birding during migration than I do in the off months. And I'm guessing that's true for a lot of people, but not everybody. I know some people who bird equally every day of the year. But they're advanced, they're hardcore, they've been at it a long time, and we're talking beginner level here. So, wade in, do what's comfortable for you, and get to know those local guys. So kind of continuing right on that theme, there's just a lot to know. There is a ton to know. Birds are a complex topic. There's something on the order of 10,000 or so species of birds in the world. You can see upwards of 350 of them or so around here. Lots of them migrate through, don't necessarily breed here. It's a daunting task to understand all of them, and I am by no means suggesting that is your goal. You may never, ever get to the point where you can be a worldwide expert on birds. I know a handful of people who are. They travel all over, and they've been birding for decades, and they have seen thousands of birds, and they have an insane list that they keep assiduously. That's, one way to go, but that's something where they took the long view. I'm a big fan of the long view. As my brother knows, I play guitar, I play instruments, and I cook. I think birding is a lot like those two things. It's also a lot like hunting, fishing, and stamp collecting. Ticks these same impulses in the brain where you have to know what something is in order to find and see it. So you study your books, and then you go hunting, you go fishing, and you wait, and you walk around, and you may stare out windows aimlessly for hours. You're not going to be very good at it at first. You're not going to know what everything is, but it doesn't matter. That's not your task. Your task is to decide if it's one of those 8 common birds, and if it's not, now you're cooking. You got something. And that long view, I've been birding a long time. I think I've got more work in front of me now than I ever knew was even possible 10 or 15 years ago. And I love that. I'm excited about that. I want to travel to more places. I want to go to more strange habitats and find birds that I didn't know about or haven't seen before. And so much like with your instrument discipline, scales and chords. You sit home and you run scales and you run chords. Or cooking, you're going to make a certain kind of sauce. You need to know how to brown butter. You need to know the difference between baking and frying. You need to get good at a grill. You got to learn to use a meat thermometer after years of doing the touch test and realizing that you weren't that reliable with it. Birding's the same way. You got to treat your birding disciplines just like those things. And if you've ever committed yourself to a sport or an instrument or cooking or whatever it is you're good at, knitting, there's so many things that I think the mindset is the same for birding. So pick up the things that helped you with those things and apply them to your birding. getting very granular now, don't just look at the flashy adult males in the field guides. You know, the old field guides, I think, were more guilty of this. When I was a kid, I probably saw some books that didn't really do a good job of showing me female or immature birds. That is changing, has changed quite a bit. Here's an example right on this slide. That top bird, one of my favorite migrant birds that you see spring and fall in Chicago. It's a black-throated blue warbler. That's one of the more highly sought warblers that all of us hardcore birders will drop what we're doing and go see. They come around, but not that many of them. Beautiful bird, always a thrill. I don't know anybody who doesn't love them. Likewise, the people who know them can recognize the females. This bird right below, that's the female of that male above. To a new birder, they'd say, no way, that's the same bird. But it is, and a lot of them are like that. The females in many cases are quite dull. This is a strategy. It's a survival tactic for them to not stick out as much. They can protect the young. They can be less likely to be predated upon when they are in breeding mode. And wrapping your head around male, female, adult, and immature looking different, even with house sparrows. So, you know, it's fun to just look at house sparrows someday and realize there's an enormous amount of variety in them. And as you acclimate yourself to that with your common birds, it will become easier to detect with your less common and your more advanced birds. Setting and habitat's another real important bit of parentheses to put around everything, or season and habitat. You know, there are certain birds you're not going to see in the dead of winter in Chicago. If you do, it's probably an unusual sighting, or maybe you're misidentifying it. So first thing you always want to filter on when you say, I've got X, Y, or Z, is to consider, is it likely I could see that bird now and in this place? There's always surprises, there's always rarities, but many times new birders may mistake something common for something uncommon because they're not considering season and habitat. I'm also going to talk about eBird in a little while, which is going to help you focus that season and habitat view. It puts a lot of really valuable information right at your fingertips, and I'll talk about that in a couple. And then, you know, the real obvious things, where to start. Attend bird walks with experienced birders and develop birder friends and mentors. That's where it started for me. But, you know, when I got past just being a casual birder, when I actually started going out with advanced birders at Montrose or Lincoln Park or the Hawk Watch, and then you meet people you hit it off with and you go birding together and you start exchanging emails about birds, and that's really where you gain some speed and you can gain expertise and information quickly. And you can go from, you know, I can barely tell house sparrows apart to suddenly I'm picking warblers out of the bushes in my yard, which is probably the goal for some of you. It certainly was for me. And I can tell you, exposing myself to other birders is what helped me get there. And do what comes naturally to you. Everybody birds differently. So, you know, I'm trying to lay out some tools that you can pick and choose as you see fit here. Not saying there's only one way to do it. Everybody birds for their own reasons and in their own ways. And I encourage that. And I think it's a beautiful part of the thing. You know, there's not a program that you have to adopt. Another simple tip, and another one you'd be amazed how some new birders don't kind of intuitively get this, is to try to describe the bird. If you see a bird you can't identify, just immediately go into information gathering mode. What color or colors jump out? Does it have any markings on the breast, or is the breast plain? Like this bird on the lower left, that's a fox sparrow. That's not a year-round bird in Chicago, mainly a spring and fall migrant. I had never seen one for years and years and years. Now I see them every year. I become aware of them. I know when to look for them. I know where to look for them. They're usually on the ground, and they are usually in my side yard in the morning when I wake up. And they have that big rusty blob on their chest, along with those little rusty marks, that yellow mandible, the gray head, the very rusty back. They're bigger than the other sparrows. That's, you know, once you know that bird, you can't miss it. But when you're new, you could very easily confuse that with any number of other birds. So by gathering some data about it, writing down or whispering into your phone, or saying to whoever you're birding with, it's got a gray head, it's got a big rusty blob on its chest, whatever you can get. Another thing is eye rings. A lot of birds either do or don't have a ring around their eye. That eye ring may or may not be complete, or might not be real pronounced. Some birds have big honking pronounced eye rings. It's a great way to narrow down a species if you can say it had a big defined white eye ring that went all the way around. Same with wing bars. Wing bars are literally just two little bars on the wings. Most birds either have them or they don't. And again, if you can tell if a bird has wing bars or not, that's going to help you narrow down what you might have seen. Look at the bill too, big or little relative to the head. Any colors jump out, even the leg color. In the fall here, we get two warblers, the bay-breasted and the blackpoll. They look very different in the spring, but in the fall, they look almost identical. And one of the great ways to tell them apart is the color of the feet. Took me years to get my head around that, and I still always have to bone up on which is which, but it's a neat trick that if you can see the color of the feet or the legs on some birds, that can help you make a definitive ID if you've narrowed it down to 2 or 3. And also look at what it's doing and where it is. Is it on the ground or is it in a tree? Can you hear it calling or singing? You know, this is just a small smattering of what you can gather. There's a ton. And the good bird books will break it out. They'll actually put a bird on the page and they'll name all the parts. You know, the really advanced birders get into all the technical names of the feathers, the undertail coverts and the primaries and the secondaries. And there's a, you know, that can be a daunting bit of info. But when you're new, all you got to do is just grab what you can. You know, these 2 birds I've got on screen, that top one, that's a meadowlark. That's a bird a lot of casual birders in Chicago never see. But you know what? They come through here every migration. And ever since I got hip to them, I see them every migration. I know where to look. I know when to look. And I go out wandering until I find one. They got that yellow throat, that bit of yellow on the face, that very distinctive back pattern, that long pointy bill. They also have a wonderful song if you catch them singing. So there is another case where if you were a new birder and you saw that and you had no idea what it was, but you said, long pointy bill on the ground, yellow throat, bit of yellow on the face, big black eye, a good birder would just blurt out, probably an eastern meadowlark. So that's a bit of strategy for how to start identifying what you're seeing. Listening while you look, also very important. It's pretty advanced skill. The really good birders I know are really good with their ears. They listen as much or maybe even more than they look. Springtime, when birds are breeding, there's a lot more calling going on. Fall might be a little quieter, but different birds handle that differently. So there's not one set of formula there. But bottom line is, much like with my strategy that you look for, you know, your obvious birds, your sparrows, your cardinals, your starlings, do the same thing with the calls. You probably already know what house sparrow calls sound like. You surely know what cardinals and robins sound like. Crows, pigeons, mourning doves. These are all calls you know. You may not have been thinking about it. You may not blurt out, oh, there's a crow calling, like I do, which usually means there might be a hawk on the block and I have to run outside and find it. But if you get yourself attuned to the calls, you don't have to know what they are. You just have to be able to recognize something different, just like with the strategy for eyeballing birds. And I'm still working my way through this. I'll fall squarely on my own sword here. I'm not that great with calls, but I'm working on it. I want to get better. But what I am good at is hearing something new. If I hear something I don't recognize, you spend time finding that bird with your binoculars. That's a great way to learn a call. You hear a call, say, what the heck is that? You learn to maybe even whistle or imitate it. Then you see that bird. You have burned that bird into your brain, and you now have that on your list of things that you can recognize both visually and audibly. And it's a great skill to have. And it's fun, especially if you're a musician. You know, I think about the calls in musical terms. I was in Mexico over the winter, and 2 birds, you know, a lot of birds have a chip call. They just go, chip, chip. Might be an alarm call, or they're just communicating to another bird, hey, I'm over here. I said to my guide, God, these 2 chips sound exactly alike. And he looked at me all incredulous. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I said, listen, chip, chip. He's like, no, listen more closely. The chip duration is almost the same. The intensity is almost the same, but they're hitting different notes. One's hitting an E and one's hitting a B flat. He's like, you got to think about it like that. Listen to the pitch of the chip, not all the other stuff. Because yes, they're all similar. But if you put a spectrogram on it and actually figured out what note it played as if it was on a guitar, those 2 birds are physically incapable of ever hitting that same note. That was fantastic advice to me. I listen to chip calls in a whole new way after hearing that. And on that note, I will mention that my friend Carl Giametti, who is a longtime COS board member, leader, etc., he's on here. He hipped me to Larkwire. Larkwire is an app that you can pay 10 or 12 bucks for, get it on your phone. It's a quiz game. It's really fun to play. They play you calls, they show you pictures, they train you on bird calls, and then they quiz you. And as you get better, they up the ante and they start to fold in more birds. I'm working out with it. I wish I could spend an hour a day on it for a year. But I have been spending time on it. It's been great fun. It's a nice diversion on a rainy day, or if you just need a break from work and you want to do something to advance your birding skills without actually going birding, consider lark wire, especially if you're an audibly minded person. If you're already a musician, if you're already kind of hip to bird calls, it's a great way to go. Might be more than some people want to do. So again, don't feel like you have to, just throwing out useful options. As far as where to go, right here in the city, like I said, bird all the time, bird wherever you are, bird out your windows, bird in your yard, bird in your courtyard, bird on your block, bird your neighbor's trees and bushes. Introduce yourself to them if you're gonna be walking around with binoculars or a camera, and tell them what you're doing. I've met a lot of nice neighbors by birding and become friends with them, and had people say, hey, I see you birding. Can you take my kids birding sometime? Sure. Now we have new friends with bird watching kids. So birding right at home is easy to do, and you'd be shocked how many birds you might see. Our yard here in Rogers Park, we are over 100 birds on the yard list. And we have friends in Evanston who've been there longer, or in some cases shorter. Josh Engel, one of the best known and best birders in Chicago, he's already pushing like 150 species in his yard in Evanston, just a mile or two from where I'm sitting right now. So you don't have to go to crazy places to go birding. You sure can. You can go all over creation, and a lot of us do, but you don't have to. So start close to home, then start going out to your local parks and forest preserves. Any green space, any beach, any dune, any place with woods or water, the river, you go kayaking, you're going to see some birds out there. Depending on what time of year you go, you're going to see some different birds. List off some popular hotspots for Chicago. Montrose Point is the mother of them all. It's got the highest cited species count of any place in the entire state of Illinois. Might be a factor of it being so heavily birded, but it really is an amazing migratory stopover that appeals to all kinds of birds. You can see it, fancy gulls there, raptors, warblers. It's warbler camp. If you want to get into warblers and you can get into Montrose in the spring or fall, that is a spot that for Alyssa and me was a big eye opener. We went from not really knowing there were warblers around to being able to see 20, 22 species in one day, with some nice folks with scopes and books out there saying, there's a blackpoll, there's a blackburnian, there's a black and white, there's a black-throated blue, there's a yellow. We got the bug bad from going to Montrose probably around 1999, year 2000 on a warbler day. North Pond is another spot like that. Labatt Woods, Northwestern University campus, a great place to bird. And then down the south side, places like Jackson Park, Northerly Island, Lake Calumet, and Big Marsh, all really good. But they are by no means the only places. There are tons of places to bird, big and small. And one of the fun things is you can find your own patch. I know birders who've gotten sick of going to the well-traveled places. They want to be alone. They want to have the birds to themselves, have a little more quiet. So they just start going wherever they can that it's not heavily trafficked. And during the right time of year, when the birds are moving or the birds are breeding, they are there. Cemeteries too, a little morbid. Some people don't want anything to do with that. I love birding cemeteries. They're quiet and the birds are great. There's lots of old dead trees. I saw great horned owls nesting in a cemetery in Chicago earlier this year. Eastern bluebirds, lots of nice birds to be had in a cemetery. And finally, don't ever go down the highway. Keep your eye on the road if you're driving, but keep that absent mind on the light poles. You see a lot of cool birds up on light poles, namely red-tailed hawks. But you can see some other raptors up there too. Likewise, high-rise balconies. We've seen people who walk out on their balcony and there's a peregrine falcon perched on the railing, and seen some amazing photos. People put up cameras to track the birds that land on their railing, and they get these urban hunters up there. Really cool. So bottom line, tons of places to go. You can bird everywhere. If you want to get focused, there's a list of spots that you can dig into. As far as what to go for, again, I mentioned there's hundreds of birds. It's daunting. It's too many to really jump into all at once. But a few easy ones to start with that A, you'll have some good odds of finding, and B, will help you kind of get the bug, are raptors. I love raptors. That was a gateway bird for me. I mentioned my Hawks in Flight book earlier that I got in the late 80s, and going to the Hawk Watch. That's really where birding got serious for me. Chicago is a great place. I see raptors all the time. Red-tailed hawks, Cooper's hawks, American kestrels, America's smallest falcon, and peregrine falcons, which have been reintroduced into the city. They are all around. More so at certain times of year for some, but bottom line is if you keep your eye out, you'll start seeing them. And once you start looking at your book and looking at your app and birding with some friends, you'll start to be able to ID one from the other. We've had Cooper's hawks, which is this bird in the upper left here, breeding in our neighborhood for the last couple of years. So we've got to see them build nests and raise and feed young right in the hood. And I took that picture earlier this spring, that is the male, I believe, just having brought back a little songbird that he shared with the female, and then she took the rest of the kids right on Jarvis Street in Rogers Park in front of my friend Diane's house. Amazing. So raptors are a cool place to start. Herons too. If you go paddling or you go walking, there's all these new river walks. You will see herons if you go down there. Great blue are the really big ones. Black crowned is kind of mid-sized. I call them urban penguins. Very cool bird. Less neck than the other ones. And big upright stout birds with a big bill. They come out oftentimes at night. If you're down by a boatyard or a harbor, you might hear their big croaking sounds and see this shadowy thing flying around, nabbing crayfish and whatnot on the banks. That's your black-crowned night heron. Endangered in Illinois, doing very well in Chicago area though. Lots of them to be seen, particularly in Lincoln Park. There's a huge rookery there, among some others. And there's also green herons. They're the smallest of the three herons. We've got all three right here in Chicago, and you'd be amazed, every month or two, all year round, I get pictures on my phone from friends near a river saying, what is this bird? It is one of those three birds every time. And it's a spark bird for people. It gets you into it, gets you going. They're big, they're interesting, they're cool looking. You can watch them hunt. In some cases, you can get fairly close to them. If you're paddling, if you're quiet, you may just roll up and not even know they're there. And suddenly there's one 10 feet from you. So look for them. During migration, as far as your colorful birds, some of the other ones that get people really excited when they're new, and still I get excited about all these, even though I've been at it a long time. You got orioles, mostly Baltimore's around here, but we get some orchard orioles, tanagers, we get some scarlets, lots more scarlets, but some summer tanagers, and indigo buntings. Those are three very colorful birds that are pretty reliable during the migration months. And very exciting to see at any time, but especially when you're new and just trying to stack up birds on your list and get yourself aware of new things. And then the two big buckets that for me were just the wormholes where I finally committed and was like, I am a birder now, I am into it. Warblers and sparrows. There's up to 36 possible species of sparrows you can see in Chicago. A couple of those are serious long shots, but they do come around. And likewise, there's 19 types of sparrows that come through here besides the good old house sparrow. As of this year, I have seen all of them at least once. That was a major life goal I set for myself 10, 12 years ago, finally pulled off. I was chipping away at it. Now, I know people who want to see all 36 and 19 of those every year. That's another level of obsession. I'm working towards that level. But initially, when you hear there's 36 warblers and you've never seen one and you didn't even know they were here, that's like, holy mackerel, how do I get into this? One way to get into it is I'm holding up, for those of you who can see me, the Warbler Guide. This is an insane book, incredible. I just got it last spring. I wish I'd gotten it years ago. I think it's relatively new. But it is nothing but warblers. It is photos of warblers from the back, below, behind. It has drawings of the tails, because normally what you see is this barely insect-sized thing moving overhead in the shade on a bright day when it's backlit and it's going 1,000 miles an hour, jumping around, nabbing flies. You don't get to see the whole bird. This book helps you figure them out from all angles, based on behavior, based on time of year, based on comparisons of similar species. It's really an obsession. And the warblers are probably as far as the tiny little birds, they're the rock stars in a lot of the country, particularly, and in Chicago. All my birder friends go bonkers for warblers when they're moving. I will get up the crack of dawn and go birding before work to chase warblers. You don't see me getting up at the crack of dawn before work for anything throughout the year, except maybe that. And the sparrows were the next one. As I got further into warblers, I thought, oh man, I'm gonna start looking for sparrows. It took me forever to kind of pierce it. I was convinced every sparrow was a house sparrow in Chicago. And then all of a sudden I saw a chipping sparrow. It had the line through the eye. It had the chestnut cap. It was little. It was making the sound. I had my book out. I'm like, that is a chipping sparrow. And it was amazing. The floodgate opened. Within a year, we had a fox sparrow in our backyard, and I started to find the others. So those are, just a snippet of what you can get into. But if you're looking for a place to start and any of these appeals to you, gravitate to them, look them up in your book, study them, and go where they might be found and when they might be found, and you will find them. And on that note, eBird is amazing. I won't spend a lot of time on this. eBird, bottom line is, it's run by Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's a free site anybody can sign up for and peruse. You can just look at it, or you can register and start listing your own sightings. But the real value it has for a new birder is that you can go in, just click that explore button and enter your county, in our case Cook, but anywhere in the country or really the world. And you can see all the birds that have been reported. You can see what the hot spots are, where are people seeing the most birds. You can look at the bar charts. I love this thing. It's a visualization of when every species is known to predictably show up based on reported sightings in your area. This again, if you think you've got a certain bird, but you're not sure, go look at eBird and see if it's likely that bird's around at that time. That's a good vote for you having identified it correctly. If you're way outside the range of when that bird's typically sighted, that'll be a pretty good indication that you might need to look at something else. But it's a cool site. I hate filling out forms. I'm a form phobic guy. I don't fill out forms for free money, not that you ever get those, but I have to really be pressed to fill out a form, as my wife can attest. And I have broken myself of that phobia, of that habit, to become an eBird user. I know people who eBird every bird they see. I will say I do not. I'm getting there, but I eBird as much as I can be bothered. I really try to eBird my yard in the spring. I try to eBird every time I see a new species I haven't seen before, because it builds your life list for you. And over time, you'd be amazed how many birds you stack up. So lots of ways to use eBird, from just dabbling and using it as an info source to actually using it to plan your birding and document your birding. Highly recommended for anybody who's of a mind to go peek at it. Doesn't cost a thing. It's right there for the taking. I got to mention these two birds. One of the most common and least common, both taken from my backyard. Top one's a LeConte sparrow. That's a very hard bird to find in Chicago. I had only ever seen one in my life. This one showed up in our yard last spring. You can bet I eBirded that immediately. I wanted that on the list. I wanted other people to know. I invited people to come over to see it. And I took about 1,000 pictures of it. That was a real thrill. That's one of those birds that's like hitting the jackpot. I went birding every day for weeks after that, just because there was the chance I might see something that good. And then this other one I just shot a week or so ago. Common nighthawks have been migrating through Chicago, as they do every fall in big numbers. We've had a couple great flights last week, and they are a real cool and interesting bird. And they migrate all the way to southern South America. So they're flying, from here or points north all the way down for the winter. It is amazing what they do. And it's a thrill when they come through. You can hear them all summer. They have a real, have a squeaky, squirty sound they make. They fly around eating insects over the backyards. You just see a couple. And then suddenly when they migrate, I peeked out the other night at 711. That's my high. But I know people who've seen thousands of them in one night in Chicago. So had to give a shout out to those guys. All right, I'm towards the end of my deck, and we're going to get into questions. I know we're running maybe a tiny bit longer than we meant to. But here's your mission, and then we'll send you this deck. Anybody who wants it, or I think we'll just send it out to the list. So if there's anything you want a reminder on, you'll have these slides in a PDF. You'll also have my handout, which is a list of binoculars to look at, bird books, apps to get, a reminder about eBird, all this other stuff. But your task, if you want to get into this and become a birder or a better birder, get yourself a book or an app, start studying, get yourself some binoculars, start using them, get to know just a handful of local regular birds. As you get better at those, inevitably you're going to start noticing other things, and you're going to be on the path. Be sure to listen while you look. Birding with your ears can be very valuable, very important, and it's fun. Birds make cool sounds. Join COS, Chicago Ornithological Society. Is an amazing organization, very inexpensive to join. They do great events. They do great bird walks. There's a lot you can gain from, A, supporting them, but B, taking advantage of what they offer. eBird, like I said, if you're of a mind to go look at that, if you're into playing with data, whether you're entering your own or looking at other people's and you want to really get tactical about what birds are where in your area, that is the place to go. There's a lot of birding groups on social media. Facebook has tons of them. I list a few in my handout. Chicago Ornithological Society has their own page. If I see something cool in my yard or in the neighborhood, I post it on there, as do many other birders. Great place to see what others are seeing, and maybe even get tipped off to a bird that you yourself could jump and go see. There are lots of books about birds, birders, and birding. It's not just all guides, Here's just a couple for those of you who can see me. I'm holding a little tiny slice of our bird library. There's a book called The Big Year. It was made into a movie with Steve Martin and Owen Wilson and Jack Black a few years ago. Kind of a silly movie. I would say the book is, like most movies, they dumb down the book a little bit. But this is like competitive birders, guys that were trying to travel all over the country to see as many as they could in a year, and they're trying to best each other, and they're spending insane amounts of money and shirking their families and their jobs. It's a very entertaining book, and it will expose you to depths of birding you never knew existed. In that same theme, there's this other book I read, and we got to see this guy speak, Noah Stricker, Birding Without Borders. He decided to go birding all day, every day, as much as he physically could, all over the world for an entire year. And he used eBird to kind of map out his trip and to make contacts with other birders. And he documented the whole thing in this book. It is incredible. You know, like a young 30s guy. He came and spoke in Chicago last year. Very entertaining guy, very knowledgeable, very sweet, humble dude, but a serious birder. Committed a whole year of his life to it. Really cool book. And again, you read something like this, it's going to put some thoughts in your head about how you might want to bird a little more deeply, a little more hard than you have before. It's going to give you some fuel to get fired up. And on that note, always be birding. ABB. That's your mantra. If you're ever kind of thinking, "Gosh, I'm not seeing any birds," just punch yourself. Am I birding? Did I go birding today? Did I look at any birds? It's very easy to do. You might not see anything good or interesting or new, but there's always birds to be seen. Last but not least, Chicago Bird Collision Monitors, and then we're going to open up for questions here. CBCM is the acronym. They are an amazing group. It's all volunteers. They deal with the fact that birds will attempt to fly through highly reflective surfaces. Birds and windows, shiny glass windows, are not a good mix. And Chicago's full of them, whether it's on your house or on all these high rises, university buildings, hospitals, whatever it is. We've got bird traps all over the city. And when the birds migrate, a lot of them are flying at night, and they just don't understand or see the glass, and they will fly headlong into it at high rates of speed. It can knock them out cold, it can kill them, it can injure them. And CBCM was founded almost 20 years ago and formed this little army of volunteers, of which I am one, as is my wife. And during spring and fall migration particularly, the city is scoured by people looking for birds at the base of buildings. We get up in dawn, and like I've done routes at Northwestern University, just walking around in the morning before work, picking up birds that bounced off the windows. Some are dead, some are not. The ones that are not, we get to a rehabber, and if they can be rehabbed and released, they are. And that happens a lot. You might get a bird out cold that looks dead to you, put it in a paper bag, give it a few hours, it gets its senses back, its brain reorients after a big impact. That thing comes back to life. They give it some food and water. They check it structurally to make sure the wings and tail are good, didn't break a leg, and poof, they let them go. And on they go with their migration. It's an amazing thing. And there are a lot of dead ones too. Those end up at the Field Museum. They go into a research library. It's one of the biggest libraries, I think, of its kind in the world. There are just thousands of birds organized in drawers. It's sad that this has to happen, but for a researcher who wants to come do DNA tests on 20 years of yellow warblers collected in Chicago, amazing gold mine of information for a researcher, and it is tapped into in various ways that I know have been important and groundbreaking. So 2 reasons I mentioned this. One, well, maybe more than 2. One is you can volunteer. If this appeals to you, even if you're not a hardcore birder, you can be a CBCM volunteer. They do trainings in spring and fall. They're doing them virtually these days. Doesn't take a lot of time. And you can either get on a route and go walk a route all the time, or you can just be on a text chain. We're on a text chain all year round. Birds all over the area, not even just the city. Hawk in a backyard in Glenview, heron in a backyard in Wilmette. I went and rescued a black-crowned night heron a few weeks ago. Mind-blowing experience. Bird didn't make it, but we tried, and it was intense. And a lot of times there are happy stories for these birds, but when they're not, they do go into research libraries, and some scientific good comes of it. So you can be part of that. More importantly, just be aware of it. You see a bird down on your yard that looks like it might still be alive, or it's still warm, get that thing out of harm's way. Put it in a little paper bag, a little lunch bag, and crimp it and put it on a shelf. Get it away from the dogs and cats or the crows in the yard. Give it some time at the least, and you might be able to bring it back to life and let it go. But more importantly, you can call CBCM, and somebody like me will come pick it up, and we'll get it to some professionals who will deal with it. So great thing to be aware of. It comes up all the time. I'm on Facebook. I have so many friends. Oh man, I just found a bird on my deck. What should I do? We're always giving people the phone number and the website of CBCM. Other areas of the country don't necessarily have as intense a version of this as we do, but there are local rehabbers and people that will do this in other parts of the country. So it's a important and really ultimately satisfying thing to be aware of and be part of in any way that you can. So Edward, I say we go to some questions. Thanks for all listening to me. I know I threw out a lot there. We will send you the slide and the handout so that you can rehash on anything, but hopefully that was good. And I would love to chat as long as anybody wants to, if you got questions.
Yeah, awesome. So first things first, I mean, everybody, a quick round of applause again for Scott. Thank you so much. That was really, really informative. And I hope everybody, learned something and got something out of that. That was super helpful. So we'll go ahead and open it up to questions here. We don't have a ton, but while I go through trying to figure these out, I see right away we've got one from Jamie Burning. Do you want to ask that one yourself? Unmute yourself and ask that question.
Sure, I'll ask Scott a question.
There he is.
Hey, Scott.
Hi, Jamie.
Cheers.
Yes,
Excellent,
indeed.
excellent presentation. I'm curious to know what is your most exciting bird you have seen, whether it be just the chase of it or just the expectations of seeing it. And then after that, I would like to know what's the bird that got away that you haven't seen?
Oh, boy.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me think about that for a second. We've, Alyssa and I have taken a couple amazing trips in the last few years, including Costa Rica and Oaxaca. And Alyssa, my wife, will tell you, I struggle with favorites. People ask me a lot of times, what's your favorite? And I do wrestle with that. I don't know why, but even when I was a kid, I struggled with it. What's your favorite baseball player? I'd reel off like 40. I always like to say my favorite bird is the last good bird I saw. So in that frame, yesterday, getting my lifer Baird's sandpiper up in Evanston was a thrill. But I will say one of the birds from Oaxaca really stands out. We got to see a bird at 10,000 feet called the dwarf jay. It's much smaller than a blue jay, and they nest in this super specific canopy habitat that there's not much left of. They've logged the hell out of the country. And that bird is kind of cordoned off, and our guide took us specifically to an area where that bird is known to still breed and exist in its proper habitat. And we dug, man. We dug and dug. We had birded all day anyway. We were up there late afternoon, and we spent something like 2.5 hours looking and listening and not finding them and staring into huge old trees, craning our necks. Alyssa went and lied down. I lied down at some point. We were almost ready to pull the plug. And our guide was relentless. He's like, oh no, we are not leaving. We'll leave if it gets dark, but until then, we are not leaving. And all of a sudden we found a little patch of dwarf jays. We got binoculars on them. I got not a picture I'm gonna print and hang on the wall, but I got a decent record shot, and it was absolutely thrilling. It was definitely, I'm glad you asked, because I'm not even sure in my own mind I would have had that at the ready, but that's the one, man. That was the best. One that got away, let me think. The parasitic Jaeger. So right now, Jaegers are flying. I know several people who saw Jaegers today at Park 556 on the south side and up at Gilson. I actually did a couple hours on, what day is today? Thursday, Tuesday and Wednesday. I spent time at Leon Beach and up at Gilson with my scope. I bought a big scope this past spring specifically for Jaeger watch in the fall, and I've yet to get one. I've actually seen one, but it was with help out on a boat. I want to find one myself from land. And until I do, that will be high on my list of things to do. And for all of you out there, Jamie Burning is a fantastic bird photographer. I see him out in the field all the time. Very patient guy. He sets up in beautiful spots with his tripod and his camo and his big camera, and he produces some spectacular images of some of the great birds we see around here. So that's a great example of a friend I've made through birding here. Thanks, Jamie. What else we got?
It looks like we had a couple of questions that were sort of answered by some of our experts in the chat as well, but I think this is Warren's kind of at least addressing. Julie asked about the best time of day to go birding.
Oh, well, that's a funny one for me, because as a beer drinking guitar player, I am not the world's greatest morning person. But morning is the time that the conventional wisdom says to go birding. And there's a lot of truth to that, especially in the spring, during spring and early summer when birds are breeding. The dawn song, if you can be up before dark, birds start singing before it's even light. They come to life, and the really good birders get out there and they can inventory an area just by songs. And then as the sun starts to come up and the insects start moving, the birds start moving, you can get your best sightings and your best density of sightings in the morning. But not everybody's a morning person. I've kind of become one. It's amazing. I mean, as a kid, I was a sleeper. My parents had to kick me out of bed every morning to go to school or even to go to play hockey or whatever it was. I actually will jump out of bed at ungodly hours to go birding because it's that motivating to me. But I'm a big proponent of go birding whenever you can. Do not ever let the hour of day or where you are or the weather constrain you. My wife will tell you, if I get free time and don't have plans, I just go birding. Doesn't matter what's going on. I bird all the time because I love doing it and I want to see what I can find. And frankly, I like bucking the conventional wisdom. I find all kinds of cool stuff at 4:15 on a slow work day or 6:30 before it's getting dark when other people are already done. So bird when you can, but certainly bird in the morning if the opportunity affords you and you're a morning person.
Awesome. Yeah, I speaking as somebody who tried to do a big year on his lunch break specifically, can confirm it's not just the mornings. We got a question here from Rosemary Sullivan. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask that question in person?
I just started birding, and I wondered, I've been listening to Jennifer Ackerman, and I've been wondering what your opinion is on her books.
Oh boy, my opinion is that I should probably read them. I don't know really anything about her, but my friends Diane Gallagher and Tom Tabatowski, two of my Rogers Park birder friends here in the neighborhood, we just had a little Facebook chat about them the other day. Tom sent some quote and it resonated with Diane and she had read something. So honestly, that was the first I'd heard. I'm embarrassed to say I don't really know anything, but that's on my list of things I should check out. Alyssa, do you know Diane Ackerman? No, my wife doesn't either, which surprised me. She's a voracious reader. So yeah, what do you have to say? Have you read it? You have an opinion or something you want to share?
I think it's really intriguing. I mean, I find her interviews to be really interesting, and I got her first book, and she just talks about, like, I think the last one she focused on birding from all over the world, and I don't know, she's just very I think she's able to make very scientific sort of talk very understandable, which I think is always good. So
yeah, big time. And I know I'm not an ornithologist, I'm not a scientist, but so I appreciate that. And I also get to bump up against some people who have studied and gone to university and studied birds. And it's fun to be exposed to that, but it can be so daunting. So to have somebody who can translate that and make that relatable for non-scientists or people who are just never going to get down to that serious nitty-gritty, it's very valuable. But I will check her out. Thank you for the question.
Right, thank you.
Okay, we just had a flurry of questions come in here. I know we're running late on time, but let's see if we can try to get through a whole bunch of them quickly. Angelina, do you want to go ahead and ask your question in person?
Sure. I was just curious what the different methods are for documenting your bird lists and if you had a preferred method.
Yeah, well, eBird for listing is certainly the way to go. You know, the original bird list was a tiny little pad and a pencil in your pocket, and I still use that sometimes. I don't really like fussing with my phone while I'm birding, but eBird does have a phone app, so you can literally fire it up and say, I'm at Montrose right now, I'm starting birding now, and every bird you see, you can plug it in. For me, that's time not looking at a bird or photographing a bird, and it might mean missing birds. So I struggle with that, but I know a lot of birders who are very good at that. And that's the way to get your best list. You just don't miss anything if you're putting it in real time, but it's a task, it's a mindset, it's a distraction. My friend Steve, who's one of my birding mentors, he's out seeing some good birds today. He has taught me that he just banks it all in his head. And when you get back to the car, then you fire up eBird. And you just run down the list. eBird shows you everything that could predictably be seen where you are. So he just eyeballs it and then lets the list trigger him. Oh yeah, we saw a blue grosbeak today, rare bird, or maybe that's not a good example. You probably have to enter that as a rarity, but it's very smart advice in that just looking at the list will trigger you to say, oh yeah, I saw one of them, I saw 10 of them, I saw 5, where if you had to remember that whole list and write it down, you'd never pull it off. But scanning that list is a good way to go. And you know, the good old pad and paper is real quick. The the more you get into it, you'll learn there's 4-digit banding codes for all the birds. There's a whole list of them you can find online. The further I get into it, the more of those codes I know. And if I'm ever doing it by hand, you write that 4-digit code instead of writing Connecticut warbler, pileated woodpecker. You know, it's Pewa, Koa, RB-goo for ring-billed gull. There's hundreds of them, but a lot of the birders I know use those. And if they're scribbling, that's what they're scribbling. And then you just make hash marks. But getting it into eBird is the way to go, because then you can run reports on it. You can see your life list. You can see how many birds you've seen in the county this year compared to in the county last year. It's very good for driving you to bird more and set yourself goals. And I did this year. I especially with COVID, I said, I'm going to bird more. I want to break all my records. I never really even tried to set records, but this year I did. And I'm well into 200 plus species in Cook County alone, which for some of my hardcore friends is nothing. For me, it was an accomplishment, a big step up. And a lot of it came down to assiduous listing. You got to write it down in order to know what you've done and figure out what you want to do. So, long answer to a short question. Hopefully that helps.
Well, I apologize. We're not going to be able to get to all the questions left in here, though I think some of them were asked sarcastically. But let's end with one more question. Anna Fillmore. Anna Fillmore, would you like to unmute and ask your question in person?
Sure. Yeah. So when I've tried using my binoculars, I always have I find it awkward fitting them over my glasses. And I was wondering if other people have that problem.
Yeah, it's tricky. I don't like birding with my glasses. I don't like wearing my glasses. I'm lucky I don't have to. I certainly like wearing them when I'm driving. I can see the horizon much better. I wear them when I'm working. If I'm staring at a computer all day, it just reduces my fatigue. I rarely wear them for more than a minute or two if I'm birding. Like if I see a bird out my window and I've got my glasses on, I'll deal with it. But usually I'm immediately off with them and hang them off the shirt or into a pocket. But I talked about this on the binocular mechanics. Can you see me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So there's these eye cups. Mess around with these. Most binoculars have these cups that you can screw out or screw down. The manuals will typically say leave them all the way down for the glasses so that you can put the binoculars, you know, the lens of the binocular essentially right up against the lens of your glasses, but they don't touch, but they get very close. I find that to be best.
Okay.
Some people like to bird with these out when they're not wearing glasses. With glasses, I think your only way to go is down. So if you have bins and you've got the cups up, certainly try them down. Sometimes I find almost you have to adjust that width a little bit. Your eyes aren't any further apart when your glasses are on, but I actually open my bins up a little bit when I put them against my glasses as opposed to, and I close them down a little when I don't have my glasses on.
Okay.
And the big thing is to figure out, you know, is your vision such that you can actually, in some settings, can bird through your bins without your glasses. That's, you know, some people can, some can't. I find I'm lucky that I can because my two eyes are different. I've got one nearsighted, one short-sighted. So I've always got one eye that can kind of carry the load. But for folks whose eyes are the same, that's not always going to be opportune. But either way, I think messing with the eye cups and screwing with the distance between a little bit is the best advice I can give on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So on that note, I'm going to close things out here. Once again, thank you so much, Scott, for joining us and doing this program. This is really fantastic and informative. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the program, we have more events just like this coming up. One is scheduled for later this September. Check out our website. If you enjoyed tonight's program or any of our programs in general, definitely consider becoming a member. Like Scott said, it's pretty darn cheap. And you know, you get all the updates and information about programs like this, hikes, and other great conservation initiatives that we're doing to help birds everywhere in the Chicagoland area. So once again, thank you guys, all of you, for being here and joining us this evening. I hope you had a good time, and we will see you at the next event. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks. This was great. Thanks.